see a bright yellow dandelion sticking out the ground, what do you think? Weed or wildflower? Do you immediately think it's time to grab the bottle of weed killer or pull it up from the ground, or do you think, that is a beautiful wildflower, I'm going to leave that for the wildlife? I'm pretty sure that many of you here today will think of dandelion as a weed, but of course, a weed is just a plant growing where it's not wanted. And weeds have this image problem. You see, over time, they've become seen as a bit of an enemy, whereas in fact, they are vital to the survival of much life on this planet. So, how can we reframe these weeds as wildflowers? And why should you care? I came across this picture of me, about a month old, sleeping in my parents' garden. Now, I'm pretty pleased that whichever one of my parents took this photo wasn't the greatest of photographers, because what they unwittingly did was document how their lawn looked at that time, filled with dandelions, daisies, and clovers. Zooming forward 7 or 8 years, it was a pretty similar picture, apart from now, instead of me sleeping in the garden, I now made enormous daisy chains. I loved watching bees feeding from the dandelions. I kept lists of butterflies that visited, and I got to put crazy hours of the morning to watch birds from my bedroom window. Maybe not surprisingly, I ended up becoming a bit of a nature geek. A few years later, though, however, this picture changed. My parents discovered weed killer. The daisies and the dandelions were no more. Now, my parents weren't the only ones that were waging a war against weeds. This notion of the neat and tidy garden and streets free of weeds was spreading like a weed itself. These wildflowers were increasingly being seen as an enemy, something to be destroyed. As that garden became less wild and more boring, my interest in nature gradually waned, and by my teens, that burgeoning passion for wildlife had all but died back and returned to soil. But the life cycle continued to turn. You see, strong seeds were sown during my time in that garden. They just lain dormant for a decade or so. It was an argument with a dandelion in my first novice attempt at gardening as an adult that started this wheel turning again. Dandelion, Dont de Leon, tooth of the lion, so named after the tooth-like appearance of the edge of the leaves. This lion taught me who was boss this day. You see, I was trying to tease the long taproot out of the soil with my bare hands, only to realize it was stronger than me. It eventually snapped and I fell backwards, but that was the jolt that I needed to remember back to my time in that garden, surrounded by nature. And so I left what was growing of that dandelion in the soil, and I vowed never to pull another wildflower from my garden again. Instead, actively looking up each and every plant that popped up from that soil and watching the wildlife return month by month. I imagine the word got around the local wildlife community that there was a crazy plant lady in town who kept the weeds growing that everyone else pulled up. Since well before my childhood years, biodiversity loss has been a significant concern. Here in the UK, 97% of wildflower meadows have been lost since the 1930s. And since that picture of me was taken in the garden, wild bee populations have declined by 30%. And it's a similar picture globally. And why is all this so important? Well, biodiversity is vital to the survival of life on this planet, us humans included. We depend on a healthy ecosystem. And now, you might be thinking, well, it's a worldwide problem. There's not a lot I can do to try and help. Well, I believe you can make a difference with multiple micro-actions on a wide scale, resulting in significant benefits for your local plant biodiversity. Let's take a moment to think of that dandelion again. If you can imagine this entire room as one dandelion seed head, with each of you as individual dandelion seeds. When the doors open at the end of the day and you float home on the breeze or in your cars, infused with ideas of how you can make a difference. For some of you, that seed won't take hold. Not all seeds do. But I hope that for a good many of you, that seed will take root. And we all know what happens when a dandelion seed takes root. So, let me share 3 ways that you can help your seed take root for the benefit of plant biodiversity. First, we can start with our own gardens and outdoor spaces. And instead of using home weed killers and installing fake plastic grass, we can actively cultivate weeds, wildflowers. It doesn't need to be your whole garden or whole outside area. Even a small patch will do. And the wilder, the better. And then you can watch the wildlife return to your garden and feed from the small crop that you've grown for them. And that is wonderful. Then we can think to use technology that each of us will have in our pocket or bag today. The mobile phone and the power of the Plant ID or Image ID app. One day in every week, you might be waiting for a bus. You might be having a glass of something cool in your garden at the end of the week. Tap into your old childlike curiosity and take a moment to look down at the ground and take a picture of one plant close up, and then feed that picture into your Plant ID app to try and identify it. Have a look at its Latin name. Have a go at pronouncing it. Read a little about it. You might come across Malva neglecta, this tiny, pale pavement mallow. Its cousin, the marshmallow, was once the flavouring for marshmallow sweets. You could find Achillea milfolium, this wild garden warrior, named after the Greek hero Achilles, who was said to use the plant to staunch bleeding of battle wounds. Or you could find Prunella vulgaris, this tiny, purple, beautiful lawn dweller that's favoured as a pollen source by bees. Learning to name plants is a great way of seeing them with new eyes and viewing them more favourably or quirkily. And it is highly likely you'll give them more of a free rein to grow if you do. And then finally, there's the power of story, because it is remarkable what story can do to help change our perception of a plant to be feared and destroyed and to one to be cherished and cultivated. Meet white dead nettle, Lamium album. Human interaction with this plant usually falls into one of 2 camps. There's the people who think that it's a really beautiful flower to pick and suck the sweet nectar out of that they might have done in their youth. And then there's the people who think it's a nettle, that it'll sting, and so they shy away from it. Well, here's the thing. It's not a nettle. It's not even part of the same family as a nettle. is actually closer to a mint, and it definitely won't sting you. So why am I singling out this particular plant? Well, white dead nettle is a remarkably resilient nectar-rich plant found world over. If you see a patch of white dead nettle growing, it is highly likely within minutes you will see a bee. You see, it's only bees that can pollinate and interact with this flower because it's only insects with long tongues that can reach down into it. And what they do is they work their way around each and every flower on that stem before moving on to the next one, and so on. It is an all-you-can-eat buffet for bees. But sometimes a more elaborate story works best. So, are you sitting comfortably? Great, I'll begin. The white dead nettle is usually found growing next to stinging nettles. And there's an old folk tale that tells of fairies getting really cross with caterpillars stealing their shoes so that they didn't get stung whilst feeding on the nettles growing next to it. So, what the fairies did was hide their shoes in the flower of the white dead nettle. And when you turn a white dead nettle flower upside down, you see two neat pairs of fairy shoes in each flower, hence one of its common names of fairy shoes. Next time you see that flower, I hope you'll remember that story and it'll make you smile. And then maybe you can tell friends who like stories or family who like a story, and then maybe they can sow some of those story seeds too. And if you have this plant growing in your garden or outdoor space, when you see it growing, I hope that you'll always remember about those fairy shoes. And then you remember about it being an all-you-can-eat buffet for bees. And then you remember that it's incredibly nectar-rich, and hopefully you will never pull that plant from the ground again, instead leaving it for your local pollinators. The American poet Emily Dickinson once wrote that hope is a thing with feathers. I like to think that actually hope is a thing with flowers. If only we take the time to reframe weeds as wildflowers. Take that seed, plant it, and watch hope and the pollinators return to your local landscape. Thank you.